Hey everyone, my name is Abraham Gonzalez. I am from Durham, North Carolina, and I am a senior at Early College High School.
And I am Aissa. I'm also a senior at Early College High School, and I'm from Durham, North Carolina. And I'm also the co-founder of the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative, which seeks to set an intentional space for young people of color within the climate justice movement in Durham. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. But first, I kind of want to address our shared disappointment in not being able to connect in person today. This was supposed to be a mass mobilization in person, but obviously that can't happen for our health and for yours. But this does impact the ability for people to be a part of this movement. Not everyone has access to internet or a device that can connect to the internet, and obviously can't be a part of this live stream. So I want to send our love and positive vibes to those who weren't able to make it today. So today we're going to talk about how we were introduced to the climate justice movement, what are some best practices in reaching out to young people of color, and how to best organize your event logistically so it's accessible for people of color. So, Abraham, how were you introduced to the climate justice movement?
Well, I was introduced into climate change from my environmental science class, where we learned about ice caps melting and polar bears dying. But I wasn't introduced into the youth climate justice until later on. So yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of people have that same introduction through their classes at school, but it's really hard as human beings to kind of relate to some of these issues around species degradation and destruction of habitats. So I was already passionate about these racial equity issues, like in terms of education, in terms of the school to prison pipeline, but I didn't see how they could connect to climate. And it wasn't until I was introduced to the concept of climate justice and the intersectionalities that come with that till I really got involved in the climate justice movement. For example, in Durham, there's a lot of food deserts in our low-income communities of color, where, for example, we live closer to a landfill than we do to a decent grocery store. So looking at those intersectional issues that intertwine both race and climate justice is a good way to get young people of color excited about the climate justice movement. It can also be hard to introduce and welcome young people of color in your movement if people of color aren't really represented in your movement. When Abraham and I went to the youth climate strike in October in the Capitol Square of Raleigh, we were one of the only young people of color in attendance, and the stage was dominated by older white people. It seemed like they were the only ones who had a voice within the movement in our community. So being able to highlight some of these more vulnerable communities and their voices would be a great way to get young people of color involved and make them feel welcome. It was honestly kind of scary for us we actually were on the stage at that protest, and it was kind of scary to talk about some of these intersectional issues because you feel like no one can really relate to that, right? So it's important to represent. Besides representation, what can also make the movement more welcoming to young people is kind of this idea of putting a lived experience with climate change over some of this very hard data, science, and policy. And if you are going to include that in your event or in your meeting, be sure to explain it to people who are newcomers to your movement. It's really hard to keep up with all the jargony language that comes out of being a part of a movement for a very long time. So it's important to slow down and be patient and be ready to explain some of the things that you're talking about when you're interacting with young people of color who are new to your movement.
In order to get people of color involved in your movement, to get this representation that we are talking about, outreach is key. This goes beyond making flyers and Facebook events. It's important to connect with pre-established youth groups in your area and not just the climate clubs at certain schools.
So if you are going to make flyers, it's important that you put these in areas that are seen by young people. So instead of just certain schools, be sure to put them at bus stops, in housing authority properties, in places that are highly trafficked by young people. Also, I noticed that there's a gravitation towards going to certain climate clubs at private schools. While those are easier to reach, it's important that we make that extra effort to contact maybe guidance counselors and teachers at public schools as well, because that's where your vulnerable youth communities are going to lie. Along with that, the pre-established youth groups in your area could include like LGBTQ plus clubs. There's some for justice involved youth in our area specifically. It's just important to reach out to those to include young people who may not be connected either with school or work, just to ensure that we're getting all youth, not just youth who are in school. You can also blast the message on youth-centric radio stations. For us, that's K97.5, the Triangle area's rap, hip-hop, and R&B station. So be sure to talk about your event or your club or your meeting on platforms that young people can access. So let's talk about what the event should look like logistically and how we use space with the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative. So it's important to kind of recognize what day your event should be on. This seems very trivial, but students or young people in general work Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, or they use that time just to relax, be teenagers. So it's important to plan your events and meetings on a weekday. For us, we usually do Wednesdays because that's when a lot of youth groups don't meet. So we try to focus on doing it Wednesday. Also, in planning the event, we try to ensure that our location is accessible. So it's not too far out of town, and if it is, it's on a bus stop or some sort of public transportation route. If our location is somehow out of the way, and even if it's not, we like to offer transportation stipends so young people can Uber or Lyft to our event. This is kind of a style note, but we also offer food. I mean, I just think it's important to offer some sort of incentive for young people who may be missing a shift at work or missing a meal at home just to come out to your event. And food, to me, seems to make a more welcoming space in general. A lot of people like to have conversations over dinner, so that's kind of what we offer at the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative.
As a Latinx person and a Spanish speaker, I feel obligated to say that in some meetings and some events, I've noticed that a lot of Spanish speakers who are only Spanish speakers have trouble translating what they want to say, or there's no interpretation. They're not able to communicate with who they want to communicate because they don't understand what you're saying. So I urge, if you are able to give Spanish interpretations or any other language interpretations, please do so. It is a must. It's hard to connect with movements in our area because I personally feel like there are no leadership of color in our area, especially Latinx leaderships.
In terms of creating a physical space that's welcoming for young people of color, the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative likes to arrange the tables in like a dinner table style fashion, right?
Yeah.
It just is a better way to engage conversation rather than like have almost a classroom like space or an office kind of space, because that can feel very intimidating for young people. Also, before and after the event, we play some rap and hip hop just to feel the energy in the room and give young people of color artists that they can relate to and just kind of translate that onto the space. Just feels more welcoming overall. Mm-hmm. We also like to be aware of the ratio of people in power to those who are not in power. So we like to watch our ratios of white people to people of color, adults to young people, decision makers to non-decision makers, just because it can feel intimidating for those who are maybe new to the movement or are in or are not in positions of power to speak up at our events. So we try to use a system of equity to ensure that everyone feels welcome. It's also important to recognize that young people of color and young people in general have other priorities like school or work or maybe issues at home that serve as barriers for them to be able to attend every meeting and every phone call. So it's important to include them in our movement despite the fact that they may not be able to put as much time as someone with other privileges. So overall, it takes an extra effort to include our most vulnerable youth populations. But what comes as a result of that is totally worth it. Knowing the conversations that only true diversity can initiate can move your movement even further. So thank you guys for tuning in. My name is Aissa.
My name is Abraham.
And if you have questions or comments or just want to reach out to us, please feel free. Our Instagrams and Gmails, I think, will be listed somewhere on the video, right there. It was nice to make this video for you guys, and enjoy the rest of the mass mobilization, and we are in this together.
Yes.
Do you have anything to say?
No. Bye.
Bye.